Chapter 2, Day 8. The first thing I'd like to address is my worry from the previous entry. For that, I have good news and bad news to mention. The good news is that Honeycomb made it through the day in one piece. The bad news is that we both missed about half of our classes in the process. I should probably get more specific. We have the same schedule of classes by design. Our first class went by fine. It was a simple lecture, something about chemistry. Honestly, I was too focused on watching Honeycomb to care. I don't think she was paying attention either, but at least she made an effort to look like she was. I understand the purpose of asking questions in a lecture, but to ask them for the purpose of humiliation, rather than expanding the discussion, is simply a waste of every pony's time. That doesn't mean I don't know how to fake an answer. It just means I get annoyed by having to do so. In any case, it was our second class that I finally started to notice particularly bad signs from Honey. I know her. The sight of other ponies is comforting to her. So, when she abandoned this, shutting her eyes and hiding her head under her desk, I can safely assume that something is troubling her. I offered to take her out of class, but she refused. She probably shouldn't have. I won't claim I'm great at predictions, but I did see her breakdown coming. I didn't particularly help that we were talking about physics. It was the quote that finally did it. It is natural for us to look for imperfections and fix them, regardless of the unforeseen consequences. Poorer taste I have never heard. Honeycomb burst into loud sobbing from this. I escorted her outside the classroom without another word. It took a few minutes for the professor to start her lecture up again. Or so I could hear from the hall. We spent more time talking than crying. To be clear, I wasn't crying in the slightest, and Honey was trying to hold back out of her courtesy. Her heart tends to be in the right place, even if it would be unhealthy. I know I disapprove of the validity of psychology, but I will at the least concede there are such valid points as healthy and unhealthy emotional states. In any event, our discussion revolved around the events following her father's death. Most importantly, how she had found out. That little piece of information somehow managed to elude me for weeks. Fortunately, it wasn't anything else dramatic or unsettling like the death itself. She simply was brought out of class and informed of the accident by her father's supervisor, or ex-supervisor, as I guess it was technically about that time. She told me that she was told that leaving was up to her that day. She also told me that she couldn't give them an answer right away because her mouth was suddenly so dry. Then she asked me what I would have done. And the honest truth is that I believe that to be an unfair question. I mean, certainly, I would be devastated by the loss of one of my parents. But the fact of the matter is that I'm a very different kind of pony. Even with a more distant relation to the deceased in the real case, I only dug myself deeper into my research. A defense mechanism, as psychologists might call it. Blah, blah, blah. Expression of disgust. Pardon my poor handling of onomatopoeia. I'm a scientist, not a poet. The point of that being that I'm falling far into a trap through this journal. What happened today was significant enough to stay in my head since it occurred, but that doesn't mean it needs to dominate my note-taking. My sincerest apologies to any future readers. I'll start cutting back tomorrow, so as not to bore you to death. To finish, however, and I'll be brief, just know the conversation was followed by a good deal of silence. I tracked time by the passing of students, and I believe we were there for 2 more classes before we finally moved. We received a few looks from passerbys, but I've mastered the art of wordless glare that messages to still say, "Fuck off." Heartstream, you should know exactly what I'm talking about. She thanked me for what I did today, and I wish the emotion associated with this would no longer be called that warm, fuzzy feeling. The emotion is happiness, mixed with relief. I'll point out the associated regions of the brain if you insist on the point any further, heart. I'll add today's notes on the prism for tomorrow's entry. Crystal Shard. Day 9. First, yesterday's research. Not much of a breakthrough, but the data are actually relevant for a change. Previous arrangements of the triangular prisms were operating under the assumption that I would have to angle them against each other in unnatural manners to produce unnatural results. Today I said, screw it, and tried a simple arrangement. 3 prisms lined up horizontally, with faces touching, to form an overall trapezoid of the triangular faces. Upon testing, I managed to get a small improvement on the conductivity of magic. Further tests will be required to prove that it is significant to the arrangement, and not, say, the atmosphere. In all honesty, some days I wonder if the extra energy I fuel my telekinetic magic with, out of frustration, doesn't radiate through the room and skew the results. That was yesterday. Today, I repeated the tests and managed similar, yet less intense results. Just below the threshold of statistical significance. This leaves me at a standstill. I don't know whether to proceed along the same train of thought or not. So, as any good scientist, that leaves me with the inevitable third option, another iteration. And now for the emotional content. Those of you disinterested, you might as well skip to the following entry for now. Today's classes were much more than a successful venture for me and Honey. Most of the topics were reviews anyway. There's a small part of me that wants to think that this was done on purpose. Maybe it was from how the professors looked at Honeycomb. Maybe I'm just delusional. I don't know. It's hard to tell without an outside perspective on the matter, and my therapist refuses to use the word crazy or any synonym of it. Besides, Honey didn't cry today. I believe this to mark the first day since her father's passing, that one could honestly say this. She's moving on. I'm a little impressed. She never struck me as being that emotionally strong. I mean no offense to her, but that's just how it seems to work. She's sensitive, but caring. I'm just an emotional rock wall. We balance each other out that way. Not to mention our varying approaches to our studies, of course. Actually, the height of her recovery seemed to come in our 3rd class. A fly landed on one of my books. Actually, it may have been this one. The point is, I hate flies. I hate insects, arachnids, and most animals. Sometimes, I even have trouble dealing with earth ponies. But that's besides the point. This is perhaps the one rule that Honey has ever enforced upon me, without any hint of reluctant action. I am not allowed to kill any living thing in her presence. So no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't even stomp on a helpless beetle. I must walk around. She halted my hoof with her magic when I tried to smash the fly in class. I looked at her, and she smiled back at me. I stopped caring about the fly. Today, I can say that Honeycomb has finally started to look like herself again. I'm glad. And yet I do wonder what this means about the journal. It's barely been a week, yet it's become a habitual part of my life. I think I'll just have to talk with Heartstream about ending these therapy sessions just to revoke his terms permanently. Not that I'll abandon writing out of my day, but it'd be a mite nicer not to have to. Crystal Shard. Day 11. I skipped yesterday out of how sheerly uneventful it was. Today wasn't much better, but I'd like to think ahead and save that last skipping day. Yesterday, I got a little research done. I ran a few scheduled tests, but got mixed, unexciting results. Today was better, even though it marked the 4th consecutive day of uncertainty on this side-matching theory of the prisms. I tried extending the line of prisms to see if I could get a more pronounced effect, but this proved to be a simple failure. This could limit the potential causes to the phenomenon, but unfortunately, it brings me no closer to an actual answer. Barring the science of the day, I figured I might as well bring up another of my daily irritations, to fill up some space on the pages. Her name is Limelight. Her area of study is something along the lines of nighttime wear for the aristocracy. I honestly couldn't care less about the specifics anymore. For the moment we first met, she was the greatest pain in my side, and then head, from the moment she first spoke. She is shallow, short-sighted, and disrespectful, and no pony does anything about it, but of course not. I would have hoped that I could avoid individuals like her at the university. I was wrong. I was so very wrong. To be fair, she doesn't flaunt her attitudes in my face, at least not anymore. She respects our mutual disdain. That much I can be pleased with. And this is how she has become but a minor annoyance throughout my days. Still, the way she, and the select few she surrounds herself with, wear the results of her research, during the day, I might add, to emphasize the point, is enough to make me want to scream. If it's not that, it's the stallions that approach her, whimpering and shaking like a puppy, with its hamstrings cut. Yes, Heartstream, I know that image is a little disturbing. I'm sure I could have come up with something better, but I hate animals almost as much as I hate her, so the fact that I relate the two things is surely a coincidence. My point? Besides a fraud and a defacement to the field of science, there is but one thing I will willingly call her. Whore. To be fair, variations count as one and the same here. But watch her passings in the halls carefully. I'm sure you might learn a few new words to insult a mare. And to think, she has the gall to call my field of study irrelevant and pointless. If there was one thing that'd make me willing to slash her hamstrings. Please, don't take this literally. I've never acted out violent thought patterns before. Admittedly, I imagine I'll read some of this later and be disturbed with myself. But for the moment, I experience the emotion of anger, and these are simply my honest thoughts put to paper. And Limelight is just so frustrating. I should stop now, before I land myself in prison, shouldn't I? Crystal Shard. Day 12. My apologies for overreacting at the end of yesterday's entry. I discussed the issue with Honeycomb today, and she agrees, although I didn't quite mention the imagery I used. Again, Honey is sensitive. I'll spare her the violent picture. In other news, on a scientific front, I'm actually working through what I believe to be an equation for deriving the differences used in magical energy between a straight lamp and my prism series. Well, what little difference there is, at least. The unfortunate truth of the matter is that it's beginning to appear that the number of prisms it would take to light the city would be both economically and spaciously unfeasible. Frustrating as that may be, it has opened my mind to other possibilities again. Later tonight, I plan on attempting to stack prisms into a larger triangular prism. I hope that by repeating shapes, we'll be able to amplify the effect. In the worst case, this will produce a rather pretty rainbow on the wall once I shine the light into it. The last thing I want is a dead end in my research. Not just out of personal pride, but that it would prove Limelight right. I'll at least take comfort in the fact that it'd be a first for her. Unfortunately, that thought isn't helping much. Crystal Shard. Day 13. I've heard the phrase, save the best for last, throughout my life. I've also been rather impatient. so I've never had a chance to try it until now. First, the not-so-interesting events of the day. Honeycomb was fully functional in our classes today. No crying, no head hanging, and about as much talking as usual. That is to say, minimal to none. But she never has been a talker to begin with. Classes were, for once, not a bore either. We were actually taught new, useful information. A small moment of philosophy actually led to today's breakthrough once I arrived home, but I'll cover that later. Our lunch break was peaceful and uninterrupted. The weather was overcast, with a few soft rain showers, exactly how I prefer it. Honeycomb and I shared a loaf of sweetbread. It was superb, or at least that's how I'll choose to remember it. I will be marking this day as one of celebration, after all. Enough about my day, however. Today I managed to break out of the dry spell of testing results, and all thanks to whichever professor brought up the subject of creativity today. This is what he said, to the best of my memory. The path of least resistance is always the most tempting. Its simple pony nature, its simple nature in general. Look at water flow, or molecules, or even air. A Pegasus moving a cloud against the wind is more likely to end up with a fluff in her face than a change in the weather. Her hooves simply cannot match the surface area of the wind, and thus pose a path of least resistance, even if it is the wrong way. A common mistake is to take the direct opposite of the path of least resistance in an effort to circumvent this problem. Sometimes, the answer really is quite so simple as to take a chance with your first instinct. But as we all know, sometimes it's not. Truly elevated thinkers know that the best option is never predefined. Options with merit will rarely be alone. Weighing the strengths and weaknesses of each against each other is the only real way to succeed. Consider the following analogy. If I started by assuming I need to avoid the path of least resistance due to its inherited failures from my first tests, then I work backwards towards the path by stacking the prisms on matching sides. I believe what the professor was implying was that there are solutions often overlooked. So today, I tried a combination of both strategies. That's not what has me excited. Today, on my way home, I came across a jewelry sales pony. He seemed to know absolutely nothing of the value of his products, as expected. He was apparently going for the mystical artifacts route. No pony was biting. The one thing he did have was something of geometric marvel. From what I could estimate, it was a nearly perfect hexagonal crystal, probably quartz. Out of boredom, I asked him what tale he thought went along with the crystal. He started on some rambling tale about a prince and a princess, a desert, and a cavern. He shut his mouth promptly on seeing my cutie mark. Terrified that I was some sort of appraisal specialist, he offered to pay me to keep quiet. I struck a deal, and then took the crystal as payment. The poor old sod deserved it, I suppose. The moment I left, I saw him trying to swindle a couple of poor young colts. The point is, this crystal was the breakthrough. I set it down next to the prism when I arrived home. The sunlight, low in the sky by then, shone through the robe. The concentrated light beam managed to actually heat up my side enough to make me jump. Not quite as hot as sunlight through a magnifying lens, but reminiscent of it nevertheless. Tomorrow, I'll have the crystal officially appraised to determine the material it's composed of, then place an order of prisms of the same material. Whatever it is, its crystals form a naturally perfect polygon. I figure that will be much more reliable than glass. Crystal shard.